Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm your host, Vered Kogan, and I'm so excited to introduce to you Yoram Solomon, because Yoram is an expert on a topic that we can all learn more about and have even more of in our life. And that topic is trust. And Yoram is the author of 14 books and has published over 300 articles on trust, innovation culture, and entrepreneurship. He holds a PhD in organization and management, an MBA, a law degree, and an engineering degree, as if that wasn't enough. And he's also the host of a podcast, an excellent podcast called The Trust Show. And a couple other things that I just learned today about Yoram is that he shares his birthday with some pretty famous people like Elvis Presley, David Bowie, and Stephen Hawking. So welcome, Yoram.
There's actually one more person, and that's Kim Jong-un.
Oh, whoa.
And of all four, he's the one who's alive. Thank you for having me, Vered. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. This is such an important topic. And when I thought about the topic, you're the first person I thought to invite because I know you through the National Speakers Association, and I've heard wonderful things about your presentations about trust. And I know that our listeners will learn a whole lot today. So how about we kick it off with you sharing a little bit about how you even got into this world? I mean, we know that the list of credentials, but what's the story behind all of that?
Well, it's funny because 30 years ago, when I worked as an engineer, if you would tell me that 30 years later, I'll be talking about trust and considered an expert on trust, I would think you're crazy, but here I am. It really started about 13 years ago when I worked on my PhD, my doctoral dissertation, and I tried to come up with the topic for my dissertation, and my mentor, he wanted me, he set a pretty high bar to what the topic is going to be. I was just aiming low. He was setting a high bar. And he said, I want you to come up with a topic that will improve your life and the lives of others. And I'm trying to come up with the topic. And then he asked me, one of those pivotal questions that will forever change your life. He asked me, what pisses you off? And I'm trying to say, well, because you don't let me pick a topic. But the words that came out of my mouth were, why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies? Because you see, Vered, I had startup companies, including in Israel and then in Silicon Valley. And at that time, I was working for a very large Fortune 200 company that was anything but a startup. And I could feel the difference. It took me 2 years, 348 pages, and a defense to defend that dissertation. And if I had to summarize it in 2 words, it would be innovation culture. So I realized that innovation culture is more important than just pure innovation. But then when I started investigating and researching innovation culture, I realized that every component that makes one company more innovative than the other, gives one company the culture that they need compared to another one, is based on one thing and one thing only. Do we have trust? And that's when I started researching trust, and that's how I got to where we are today.
Wow, that is fascinating. And I'm curious to know, what is your definition of trust?
Well, dictionary definitions really didn't help. I started going back to the first time anybody ever tried to define trust. But to me, I'll tell you the definition, then I'll explain it. To me, trust is your willingness to accept the possible negative consequences of giving control over something you have to another person. Here is where it starts. It starts with risk. We have to take risks sometimes. We take risk, we try to avoid risk. Risk translates in our head, in our brains, to fear. We're afraid of certain things. By the way, you and I might be afraid differently or to different levels from the same objective risk. So risk is objective, fear is subjective. In order for us to feel safe, we have to trust someone or something, including ourselves or God. We need to trust something more than the level of fear that we're feeling of taking a certain risk. This is how all those things are combined. But trust is really our way to compensate for fear that we feel.
And so how do we get that trust when, all the data, all the evidence tells us that we shouldn't?
Yeah. So how do we know that we can trust someone? Three components, actually two major ones. One is what they do, and the other is who they are. The who they are part comes down to competence, shared values, and fairness and symmetry. We're not going to trust someone if the relationship is not a fair relationship. That's the third one. We're not going to trust someone who is not competent in the context that we need to trust them. So keep in mind, and this is one of my 8 laws of trust, that trust is contextual. So would you, Vered, trust me to fly a plane as a pilot?
Yes.
I would say yes, because I am a pilot. But would you trust it? Would you trust me to play golf with you? You shouldn't. I never played golf in my life. I don't know how I got to this age. Never played golf, not a single time. So it's contextual. So you have to ask yourself, can I trust this new person to do a very specific thing? It's not a generic thing. It's not a universal thing. I can trust this person or I can't trust this person. You need to know if you can trust this person in doing something very specific. Now, how do you know if they're competent? Well, you can tell by, if you're hiring someone, reviews, references, credentials that they have, what other people said about them. This kind of builds a picture of competence. Fairness and symmetry is more situational to the relationship that we currently have. Are we at the same level? Are we at different levels? Are we in different groups? So we're starting to get into fairness and symmetry, the give and take of the relationship. Now we get to shared values. And shared values, in my research, what I found was that shared values has the biggest impact on whether I trust you or not. Shared values is divided into 3 components as well: universal, personal, and situational. Situational would be like having a common enemy. So let's say that you're hiring someone and there is a common enemy. Once again, it's a result of the circumstances you and the other person are in. So circumstantial, situational, do we have a shared enemy? If you serve in military, shared enemy is a very well-defined thing. But in the corporate environment, what would be a shared enemy? A tight budget, a mean boss, a tight schedule. The fact that you have that in common builds trust. But that's something that happens over time. Now we go into the universal shared values. Well, those are things that are really universal. So is this person telling you the truth? Is their body language consistent with what they say? Those are things that are universal. If they don't have that, you're not going to trust them, period. It doesn't matter what context. But the personal shared values, unfortunately, we live in a very divided political environment right now, and people would tend to not trust people from the other party, and it's crazy. I have friends on both parties, but not everybody does that. And so there are certain things, ethical standards, we look at things differently, that would cause you to trust me and another person to not trust me. So this is why you can't have a personality assessment on this other person. You can ask the other person to take Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or anything else, but it's still not going to say that you trust them. I think the best example I can give you is, I also teach at the Southern Methodist University, SMU. And one day I saw my daughters, one of my daughters has already graduated from college. The other one is halfway through. And one day I saw the younger one signing up for a class, and she was going to a website called Rate My Professors. Never heard of that website before. And what she was doing is she was looking at her potential professors, to decide based on anonymous reviews of previous students. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. Wait, I teach at SMU. Do I have a page on Rate My Professors? So I went to rate my professors. I looked myself up, and I have a page. There are 24 reviews, and I started looking for the reviews, and one of the reviews gave me 5 stars out of 5. Says I was awesome, and that I am so engaged and invested in their success, and I mean, all great things. Then I look at the next review. The next review gives me 1 out of 5. By the way, 1 is the minimum. There is no 0. 1 out of 5. I'm awful. I'm this and I'm that and all the bad things about me. Well, I look at that. I compare the two, and I don't know who they are because it is anonymous. But one thing I can tell what class they took. When did they take this class? They both took the same class at the same time. How can 2 people, and I was the same person, how can both of them see me so differently? Trust is relative. You can't just say somebody else trusts this person and therefore I have to trust that person. Not necessarily. You have to make sure that there are shared values. Now, the rest of it, the what you do part, that happens throughout the interactions with the other person. This is how much BS do they bring into the interaction with you, how self-centered they are versus empathetic, how much time and how intimate do you get. And when I say intimate, what I mean is the communication going through email or text or words only, or is it going through tone of voice or body language, facial expressions? The higher it is, the more intimate it is, the faster you build or realize you cannot trust the other person.
So thank you for explaining that. And I just intuitively agree with you in terms of my experience, which brings intuition into the picture. So how does intuition impact our level of trust?
Well, I think one of the best ways to describe it is really in the, I started mentioning it in the context of your body language or your nonverbal communication and verbal communication. I don't know, you probably heard of Albert Mehrabian and his 738-55 rule, and I can argue with, first of all, he's going to tell you that he is misquoted. This is not how we communicate. It's not that we communicate 7% through words and 38% through tone and 55% through body language. Really, in his research that took place in the late 60s and published in the book Silent Messages in 1971, he's talking about liking. He's talking about feelings and emotions that are conveyed only 7% through the words, 38% through tone of voice, 55% through body language. I looked at his research. I can argue with his sample and how he did this research. So let's put this all aside and focus on just one thing that he said at the introduction to this book. You know, the pages that actually have Roman numbers instead of regular numerical numbers. He says this: when your nonverbal communications do not support the words that you use, people distrust you. This is where your intuition comes into play, because you look at another person and you see that what they say is not what they mean. Because you know what? You can control what you say. You can control the words that come out of your mouth. You can definitely control the word that you type in a message, because you can clear, delete, and rewrite and wait 5 minutes before you send, but you cannot control your body language. And so when you see that the body language is not consistent with your tone of voice, not your tone of voice, your nonverbal tone of voice and body language are not consistent with the words that they say, you don't trust them. Now, how do you use that intuition? By making sure that your communication uses a high level of intimacy, that you do see nonverbal communications. Over time, you will train yourself to notice these inconsistencies. But even without that training, you have something in you. Call it a mindset, which kind of reminds us of the name of your podcast. Call it a mindset. Put yourself in that mindset that when you want to, especially initially, when you want to know if you need to trust, if you can trust someone, other than reading their bio and references and everything else, because remember, references, one person might trust them, the other person might not. Just get into that mindset of, I need to have as high level of intimacy, especially early on, so I can assess the consistency of body language and verbal.
So what happens now as many organizations consider permanently staying virtual? Yeah, so having meetings through, virtual means, how does that impact our ability to build trustworthiness or to assess whether someone is trustworthy?
It's funny because as soon as this pandemic started, one of the first things that I did was I started talking to organizations about how do you maintain trust when you work remotely. I think working remote is going to be here to stay. But initially, you remember when we were putting masks? You remember when we looked like this, right? There are more muscles below the eyes than above the eyes, the eye line. And so it was actually even better to hold a Zoom meeting, or not necessarily Zoom. I'm not advertising Zoom, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams. There, I advertised everyone. Skype, Facebook, and others. It's the fact that they didn't have to wear a mask. So can you see the rest of my body? No, I hope not. But you can see the majority. You can see my body language here. And so when we're working remote, try as much as possible to make it a video call. Internet speeds are going up. It's not an issue to use video. Use video as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. So how do you know when to let go of trust? And what I mean by that, let's say someone has proved to you directly that they're not trustworthy. Maybe they broke their trust, your trust directly, or you've heard that they have. When do you know that enough is enough and you need to let go?
Actually, it's funny because of my books, 4 of them are in a series called Can I Trust You? And they depend on different roles that people have. The first one is called 50 plus 1 habits that will make you a trustworthy salesperson. So this is for you in your capacity as a salesperson. The next one is 70 plus 1 habits that will make you a trustworthy leader. Another one, 67 plus 1, that will make you a trusted team member. And the last one is 60 plus 1 habits that will make you a trustworthy project manager. So different roles. Now, why plus 1? I mean, can't I just do 50 plus 1 equals 51? I'll just call the book, the subtitle is going to be 51 or 71 or 68 or 61, because the plus 1 is common to all of them, and it answers exactly that point. Through this framework in the book of trust, I show you how, if you can trust someone. There are certain things that if I don't trust you, can be fixed. So let's say I don't trust you because you're not competent enough in the area I need you to be competent in. Well, if we have a frank conversation and I tell you, look, Vered, you're not doing this professionally enough, you can learn how to do it, or you don't care. Things like fairness and symmetry and situational components, well, either you change them or, they're going to stay there. The behaviors, what you do, the intimacy, the time. One of the things that I do is help people figure out how do you become more trusted. We end up with just one bad thing that you're doing that's holding you back, and we're working on how to fix them. The one area that you can fix, well, you can fix it if the other person doesn't care and says, I don't care about being more trusted by you. You can't fix that. So if that happens and the other person just says, I don't care, you don't trust me, I don't care, no to give up. But the other area is when you don't have shared values, when your values are not shared. When I see things in a certain way, you do something in a certain way. I'm on the dissertation committee, the doctoral dissertation committee for a student, and she brought up an interesting thing. She said, an uncivil behavior at work is when somebody texts while you're talking to them. Well, that is very uncivil. Okay, that's how she describes it. And I said, well, doesn't it depend? Doesn't it depend on your generation? Vered, you're younger than me, and does your generation feel that it's okay to text while somebody talks to you? Maybe not, but for the younger generation, for my daughters, I asked my daughter, is it is it okay if I text while you talk to me? She says, yeah. Well, why is that a problem? Well, it is a problem for me if you do that. That's not a shared value. And that's not going to go away. Now, it might not be important. And if it's not important, then that's fine. But if we don't share a value that is important, at least to me, the trusting person, the person who's expected to trust, then that's a problem. And so there are things that are not going to change. And of course, the other person may say, I don't care. I'm not going to try and earn your trust. This is again where we need to go back into that word mindset. We have to have the mindset that not everything can be fixed. You will not trust everyone. And that plus one in every one of my books is that one, is know when to give up. And so here are the symptoms. They don't want to change. There is no trust because they're doing something and they're not willing to change it. Or we don't have shared values, which are very, very hard to change. I mean, I'm not going to change your values because they don't match mine. At that point, you have to adopt the mindset of you're not doing them a favor, you're not doing yourself a favor, you're not doing the organization a favor by trying to stay there, even though trust will never be built.
So what if you're part of a project team? Let's say there's some change that's being initiated into the organization, something new, different. And, you're not seeing eye to eye. You just don't trust one of the individuals on the team, but yet you all have the same outcome that you're working towards. What then?
Well, do you think the trust or lack of trust has any impact on the project outcome? I mean, we're on the project team, right? So what do we care about? We care about three things. We care about being on time, on budget, and on specifications, right? This is what we care about. So there is a research that was done, actually, oddly enough, by an Israeli professor in an Australian university. And he came up, he studied 120, I believe, different projects in different industries, different fields, and he found a very strong correlation with very strong statistical significance between the level of trust, and he applied this to high-risk projects, as if there is another kind. So high-risk project, when there is high risk and high consequences to failure in a project, plus one standard deviation in the level of trust improves project performance by 45%. So let's first agree that it's important. Okay, trust is important. So now the question is, there is no trust. So when I work on a project team, the first thing that I look for is the level of dependency or reliance. If I don't rely that much on your role in the team, does it matter if I trust you? I don't rely on you. That there is nothing that you will do that will, pardon my language, screw up my part of the project. But if I do rely on you, there has to be a high level of trust. And if there is no high level of trust, two options. One is expect a 45% degradation in project output. If that's okay with you, keep the person on the team. Otherwise, one of you has to go. It's as simple as that. It's I know we can't. I mean, we're going to do our best to improve. You know how we typically there you have your areas of strengths, and the other area is what? Your weaknesses? No, we don't use the word weaknesses in corporate America. We use the word areas for improvement, right? Not everything has to be improved. Not everything can be improved. And sometimes the hardest decision is to know where to let go, because you really are making that decision. If there is high reliance, but no high trust, you're making a decision. We're going to hurt project performance, or we're going to separate, which is very, very hard to do. Didn't say it's easy, but it's one or the other.
So how do you, as let's say a new leader of a project or of a team, how does one build trust?
Okay, so the first thing, again, is trust is built by you being trustworthy and me willing to trust you. I want to say one more thing, and that is that the relationship between trust and trustworthiness is reciprocal. And, the easiest way to describe it is, of course, it's reciprocal. If you're trustworthy, then I will trust you. Well, actually, it works the other way around as well. If I trust you and I demonstrate to you that I trust you, you will behave in a more trustworthy way. I mean, just think about that. Otherwise, you have cognitive dissonance. You know that I trust you, and you don't behave in a way that will earn that. It feels bad to you. So I can start at zero. My level of trust in you is zero. And let's say that your trustworthiness measured between 0 and 100 is 50. Okay, so you're at 50, your trustworthiness is 50, but what I extend to you is 0. Well, guess what? When you feel that I don't trust you, you think you're going to continue and operate at a 50% level? No, you're going to start to decline. Now, on the other hand, when I see that, well, actually, I can trust you with this, and I can trust you with that, we're going to meet in the middle. Which
is so fascinating, because this is and sorry, I didn't mean to intervene. This is a podcast about mindset, about belief systems. So if I expect, that I can trust you, I might not know why yet or how, but I don't hold the opposite, belief, right? I'm open and I'm curious. Then it's, from what you're sharing, it's much more likely that the, person on the other side will behave in a way that will earn my trust, right? That will validate my belief in them, my trust in them and their abilities.
Yes. And the flip side of that is, let's say that you're still at 50% trustworthiness, but I extend 100% trust. Well, two things happen. One is I start realizing that you do let things drop because your trustworthiness is at 50%. It's not at 100. So I start trusting you a little less, but you feel that I extended 100% trust, and it doesn't feel right for you to not earn this trust. So you start climbing up from that 50%. So if I start at 0, we're going to meet at 25%. If I started at 100, we're going to meet at 75%, even though you started in both cases at 50% trustworthiness.
Yeah, which demonstrates how important it is to keep an open mind and really give people the benefit of the doubt, even if we might have heard something or, sense something, to just be open and believe and notice what shows up.
Yeah.
So how does one regain trust when trust is lost?
Okay, so first of all, I have to add one more thing, and that is that losing trust is much more painful than gaining trust, and is much more severe. And the reason for that is because we respond much stronger to negative occurrences or events than to positive ones. This is, by the way, why we are much more likely to post a negative review if we had a negative experience than to post a positive review if we had a positive experience. So we are, when trust is lost, when we drop trust, it's going to take forever to gain it back. You gain it back by, again, who you are, but mostly what you do. So there is a reason why you lost that trust. Okay, what is it? Did you lose trust because you are not competent enough in what you do? Well, we can fix that. I'll become more competent, and I'll demonstrate that I'm competent. Did you lose trust because all of a sudden we found that we don't share a specific value? That's going to be an issue. That's going to be an issue because you can't fix that. But you can gain trust by the level of positivity you bring to every interaction. That brings, by the way, the second component of why my framework of trust is different than anything else, and that is that it's dynamic. I look at it as a dynamic thing. It doesn't stay static. How does it change dynamically? The level of positivity, which is made of two parts, the level of BS that you bring. So BS, could be many things. One of them, for example, if your behavior is very formal, very unfriendly, it's hard to accept things from you, as opposed to very friendly, very open, very informal. It's easier to build trust that way. How self-centered you are versus how empathetic you are. And empathy, by the way, is, do you really see things from my perspective, or do you only see them from your perspective? So I can break those down to a lot more component, but that's the positivity that you bring to every interaction. Vered, every interaction that you and I have has an element of positivity that is either positive or negative. Then comes the time and intimacy, and I multiply the two. How much time do we spend together? How frequently do we communicate? And how intimately do we communicate? So do we communicate over email, the lowest level of intimacy, or do we communicate face to face where I can see you, hear you, see your body language, see the consistency? So if you lost trust in me, the way for me to build that trust back is, first of all, identify what is it that I'm doing wrong? What's holding me back from being trusted by you? Once we identify that, I have a 7-step process that I take my clients through, and that's identify the relationship, identify what is it that you're doing wrong. I'm shorthanding it. Then find what habits do I need to develop to build that trust again, and build that habit. I'll give you an example. When I worked in this large Fortune 200 company, I had a group, I had a business of $100 million and 89 people reporting to me. Well, one day, one of my peers told me, look, the way you communicate with your people, you only communicate with email. And I know that it's more convenient and all, but you don't, he didn't say you don't build trust, but essentially that's what he was indicating, that I'm not building trust with them. His advice to me, which is the habit that I decided I'm going to take, was get your butt out of your office, go meet them in person. And I thought, man, that's a great idea. That's a great advice. And so the new habit that I wanted to implement was every one of my 4 direct reports, I'm going to meet for at least 30 minutes, face-to-face, one-on-one, talk about anything once a week, every week. I keep track of that. All the others, I'm going to make sure that I go and visit every one of my 89 people. And sounds simple. It's amazing how it works to build trust. Just the fact that you increase the intimacy and the frequency of time that you spend with them. Now, obviously, if whenever I spend time with them, I bring a lot of BS, self-centered and everything, I'm going to be destroying trust even faster, which is not something to aspire to. But if what I do is I bring positivity, no BS, I'm empathetic, I see things from their perspective, the more time, the more frequently that I meet with them, and the more intimately that I meet with them, face-to-face as opposed to email, the faster I'm going to rebuild the trust that they may have lost in me.
Wow. So, it sounds, as you said, very, very simple, right? These are things that we all intuitively know. Yeah. When we project positivity, when we take the time to ask the questions, to be empathetic, to genuinely be present, and to be vulnerable at times when it's appropriate to do that, then we can increase trust. And it's, some people might say, well, who has the time to go and meet with their whole team, especially when it's a bigger team, or even with our own children. Sometimes we're so busy or they're so busy, and yet it's the little things. It's those little conversations, the hello, they're remembering somebody's name, or that their, child went to college, or, their newborn grandchild, or, was born. It's those things that make all the difference. And so thank you for that reminder. And anything else that you believe, before we complete here today, that our listeners really need to know in order to experience even more trust in their life? And that includes trust in themselves.
I think the first thing is that you got to remember that you're not going to trust everyone, and you're not going to be trusted by everyone. It always annoys me whenever I get the reviews on giving one of my, the student reviews on giving one of my classes. It always annoys me that I see that 24 out of 25 students gave me a 5 or at least a 4 out of 5. And there's this one that gives me a 1. And I go, but they were in the same class. You're not going to earn everybody's trust. Trust is not universal. and this is something that's very important for your audience to hear. Trust is not universal. You're going to be trusted by one person and not trusted by another one. Trust is dynamic. There are things that you can do. And, if I can end with one sentence, the answer to these two questions is going to have the biggest impact to your success or failure, professional and personal. Can I trust you? And can you trust me?
Very profound questions that really make all the difference. That's right. So thank you, Yoram. And, I have your series of books, and, and I wish for the listeners to engage in your videos. I know you have many of them on YouTube, and with your material, because it's so simple yet so profoundly impactful in our life, and can really make all the difference in terms of having harmonious relationships, feeling comfortable, feeling at ease, and ultimately getting even better results. And so how can people learn even more about you, your books, your videos, your courses, and so on?
Well, the easiest way is just go to my website, yoramsolomon.com. Yoram, Y-O-R-A-M, Solomon with 3 O's. Don't put an A there, SOLOMON.com. Obviously, you can listen to my podcast, The Trust Show. It's a new podcast. It's a podcast where I just describe everything that I told you here and much, 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 much more. YouTube on The Trust Show again. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your wisdom, your time, your expertise. It is such an important topic, and I'm so thankful that you took the time to be with us today.
And thank you for having me, Vered.